I'm excited to dive in today. Habits is something I've been fascinated by for years because I'm always so curious. Like why do we do the things that we do, and how can we turn ideas into actions, which become sort of consistent behaviors, and then habits over time. And I was kind of thinking about what is my approach to healthy habits, and I'm so excited to dive into all of like the different coaches from this month because I'm so curious how everybody approaches this. And I've been exposed to sort of like the large scale frameworks that I think many of us have probably seen from people like in the early days, Charles Duhigg in the book The Power of Habit, and more recently James Clear's book Atomic Habits. Um, for sort of like the bigger frame of understanding that a habit is this behavior that becomes somewhat automatic for us, and when it does, it slides from the sort of like the front part of the brain that's very energy intensive more towards like the older part of the brain that's much more efficient and just goes on autopilot. um, so we're always trying to create habits in everything that we do, and also because we know that it's our behavior that is repeated over time that tends to be the big difference maker. It's not those like one-time big monumental efforts. Those make us feel good for a hot minute, sometimes a hot hour, sometimes a hot week if we're really lucky. But it's the little things that we do, over time, repeatedly, that really can make a huge difference. And I thought an interesting frame that I would share to walk you through my lens on habit is actually what I call the good life buckets. Um, but before I dive into that, I wanted to share one other take on sort of the general topic of habit formation that I think is maybe a little bit less explored. Like I said, so many of us have been exposed to James's work, Charles's work over the years, and the idea of creating habit loops and the idea of, like identifying behaviors and then making it easy and setting up rewards. There's somebody else who's done a metric ton of research in a more academic setting, Professor BJ Fogg, who has run something that at one point was called the trying to remember the name of the lab. Now it's like the Persuasive Technology Lab there. But it turns out that many of the most habit forming apps, for better or worse, that are out on the planet these days were generated by students of his that went through his class and then turned around and created these apps, things like Instagram. And he's been fascinated at how we create an experience that allows somebody to step into it and then turn that into a regular behavior that just becomes a repeated part of their life, almost on autopilot. Like, how do we actually make that happen? And he came up with this thing that he calls the Fogg behavioral model. And the shorthand for it is B equals MAT. So B is the behavior that we're looking to turn into a habit. M is motivation. How motivated are you to do it? A is ability. Do you have the ability to actually do this? And T is a trigger, a certain thing that sort of like says it's time, do the behavior. And what's fascinating about that is that most of us, when we're trying to turn a behavior, let's say, like having a glass of water, every morning when we first get up, we're trying to turn that into a habit because, we feel like it's a good way to start our day, to hydrate ourselves. Very often we're trying to convince ourselves, we focus on the motivation side of the equation. So the trigger in his model, the MAT, motivation, ability, trigger, the trigger is basically waking up. That's pretty straightforward. We don't have to do anything to create the trigger. It just happens. We open our eyes. And then we choose like, well, if we really want to build this into a habit, do we focus more on motivating ourselves to do it? Or do we focus more on on the ability side, making it as easy as humanly possible, removing as much complexity and friction from the process as humanly possible? Well, it turns out most of us actually focus on the motivation side. How do I motivate myself to do this thing? Whether it's drinking a glass of water in the morning, whether it's walking around my block 5 times, whether it's whatever it may be, focus on like, how do I get motivated to do it? And we put all the motivational quotes up and we listen to the stuff when we're doing it to get ourselves motivated. So it's exciting and energizing. And we focus on like the reasons to do it. We do all the like, here are the 5 things why this is really, really, really important to me. And we write it on our mirror in the morning. And we do everything we can to sort of like flip the motivational switch. Well, it turns out that motivation is not unimportant. But what BJ's research found is that it's actually way less important and way less effective to focus on the motivation side to develop our habits, our healthy habits, than it is on the ability side, on the ease side. What he realized was that the thing that actually will allow you to say yes to a behavior and then repeat it enough times that it turns into a habit is to literally do everything humanly possible to make it impossible to say no, to make it as easy as possible to do the thing, to remove complexity from it, to remove friction from it, right? So this shows up as removing steps, removing intensity, removing duration, even removing doing the thing at a level that would make it, quote, effective in the beginning, and just focusing on making it literally impossible to not do the most basic thing that would eventually grow into a higher level of intensity, like more engagement, that would grow into something where it becomes effective. So for example, rather than focusing on why, like getting myself super motivated to walk a mile in my neighborhood every day, take a lunch break and walk a mile, right? That's going to take me, 15, 20 minutes. It's going to take me out of my day. It's going to take time away from my lunch or away from my work. If it's really hot out, I might get sweaty. I've got to change. I got to put on my running shoes. I got to do yada, 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 yada. So maybe I'm going to focus on all the things to motivate myself to do it, right? I'm going to get myself up for it. I'm going to remind myself how important it is to my health, to my well-being, to my state of mind, to my relationships. I'm going to put a little thing on my computer, a sticky note that says it's time. And I'm going to have 5 more sticky notes, each one with the reason why this is important to me. So I remember the motivation side, right? But it turns out that's not going to be the thing that actually gets me to do it. It's helpful, sure. The thing that gets me to do it is to literally structure that walk in a way where it's impossible to not do it. So if I actually want to do this, and I'm going to focus on the ability side more instead, what I'm going to do is say, okay, so every day at 12:30, I want to build the habit of walking. So how do I make it so it's almost impossible not to do it? Well, I'm going to figure out what are all the friction points. It's a bit of a pain in the neck to go and have to change clothes and change shoes and go through my closet and pick out what I'm going to wear. Okay, so instead of doing that, I'm going to put literally right in me. I'm in my office right now, right? Over to my side is a couch. I am going to, when I wake up, before I actually have to do the activity, I'm going to put my running shoes right next to me on the floor. I'm going to put my shorts and my t-shirt right next to me on the couch, and my sunglasses and my sunscreen, because I live in the mountains at altitude and you got to protect yourself. So literally I've just taken a whole lot of friction out of the process for me, right? I'm also going to put a little water bottle with me right there because I know I might get a little thirsty if it's hot out, but I'll take my hat with me. So I've now taken care of the pain in the neck side of I've got to leave. I've got to go to my closet. I've got to find my shoes. I got to put them on. I got to figure out what I'm going to wear. I got to find my sunscreen. And if it's hot out, well, I already have my hat there, so I'm protected. So I basically said everything that would be sort of make it give just enough friction that I wouldn't do it. I've pre-thought about, and I've actually set myself up. So it's literally impossible for me. If I finish our jam today, and for my time, it's going to be actually about 12:30 in Mountain Time. And my goal was to go and walk for 20 minutes and turn that into a habit, right? And I sort of I hit the leave button on our video platform here, and I glanced over to my left, and sitting there were all the things I just talked about. It would be literally impossible for me not to actually just take 40 seconds, throw them on, and walk out the door. Whereas the extra 5 minutes it would take me to do that right now it sounds absurd that that would actually create enough friction or resistance that would stop me from doing the behavior that I want to turn into a habit. But what the research shows is it does. It takes an absurdly small amount of complexity or friction to actually knock us off our desire to do something that is healthy and then eventually do it enough times through repetition to turn it into a habit.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.